Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give about a minute or so for people to spool into the Zoom webinar here, and then we will get started. So we'll kick things off in just about a minute or so. All right, I don't want to penalize the timely, so we're going to get things kicked off here. I want to start by wishing everyone a happy new year. For those of you I haven't had the privilege to meet, I'm Tom Cronkite. I'm one of the co-founders of Certified, licensed attorney, large title agency owner here in Michigan, in wire fraud victim myself. We are very excited to be kicking off the 2022 season 2 of the webinar series we started last year, titled To Catch a Fraudster. We had an amazing turnout, both in real time and the session being watched afterwards from teams, and I'd encourage you to do that, teams that aren't able to make it from a training perspective. And we highlighted just some great content and speakers as we kind of track the trend lines around wire fraud and business email compromise. This year promises to be even better. The first quarter, we've got just some amazing lineup of speakers from people that we met along this journey last year. So we will be analyzing recent trends in fraud as it really relates to the real estate industry, how those instances impacted transactions and those parties involved. We're going to hear just an unbelievable story today with our guest speaker, and doing kind of a post-game looking back to say, how could that have been prevented, not only as industry participants, but in the mind of those that unfortunately experienced this as a victim. Know that wire fraud stems from business email compromise. Business email compromise has now grown into the largest and fastest growing cybercrime in the United States, and there is simply not a close second. 2021, we saw another sharp increase in not only the amount, but the frequency of instances in real estate transactions where wire fraud took place after business email compromise, social engineering, and the redirection of funds. So it's taking place just in the last 24 working hours. Certified has received 6 funds recovery requests totaling over $2 million. So don't think that just because we turn the calendar over that somehow they're pivoting to something else. In fact, I would say they're coming in pretty hot again this year. By way of housekeeping, if you have questions, please put them in the questions panel. I will be able to monitor that. I'll pop that up in just a second, and I may take that in real time, or we'll spend a few minutes after. Everyone will receive a recording of the presentation in handouts, and please take this as an opportunity to train internally or externally about this important topic. Again, we're doing this series every single month this year. It's something you're not going to want to miss. You can invite your colleagues, your referral partners, your friends. Great storytelling, timely trends and tips. I mean, that's what we put a lot of time and energy into this. And we have people as courageous as Krista, who you're going to meet in just a second, willing to come on and say, look, this is something out there that more people need to know about. So without further delay, let's get things kicked off. I want to introduce you to somebody that came into our lives 147 days ago. To be exact, we just calculated this before we started the broadcast. Krista Gartelos is a talent acquisition manager for a dairy cooperative out of Missouri, right, Krista?
Yep, that's correct.
A first-time home buyer, and during that journey, she did experience a wire fraud. And what we're going to run through is what were the details surrounding not only the transaction, but also some of the decisioning to purchase a home, and what did that journey look like? I think it's very important as we set the stage to say, what is it like for the Kristas of the world that are saving up and trying to identify a property that they're going to acquire. During that process, the intervening communication with the fraudster is going to be analyzed. It's a fascinating string, and we have the actual string to show you. And then what was the impact in kind of key learnings. So with that, Krista, if you could just I guess not only introduce yourself, but walk us through the journey of buying a home. Looks like you bought a lovely home in Missouri. We were just talking, this was something that started several years before we even started looking, but take us on that journey, what it's like to be a buyer right now.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much to Tom and his team for having me today. I'm excited to be here to be able to help spread awareness on this topic. As Tom had mentioned, I am a first-time home buyer. I had been renting prior. I had been probably, diligently thinking about buying a home for the past, I would say 3 to 5-ish years, but maybe spent the past 3 years before that putting aside money to try and save specifically for it. With the pandemic, I had started working from home, so that wasn't an ideal situation, being in an apartment. I just didn't have enough space. So I think that really encouraged me to start looking. So prior to actually purchasing my home, I had been looking for a house for about a year. The market here, as it is across the entire country, is extremely competitive. So I had some misses when it comes to putting in offers and just having a ton of competition. So I ended up deciding to purchase a new construction townhome. Went into under contract that I think February of 2021, and it was scheduled to be complete in August of 2021. So I did have to wait a good 6 months for that construction to be complete, but my closing was scheduled in August. So really had quite a lot of years of planning and preparation to lead up to that time.
So I want to unpack that a little bit, because for those of you, most of our audience is somewhere in the title settlement industry. We have attorneys on, we got some lenders on, but for the most part, it's title settlement. Back us up a little bit. You started thinking about or planning this journey 3 to 5 years ago. When did you start saving for the new home, and how did you identify kind of what amount to save? I'm just curious on what that goal setting looked like, because it sounds like you were in that decision-making process and you started to set that goal years in advance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I first identified what my budget might be for a house. It's a very wide range, of course. But once I had that range in mind, really tried to set a target goal of at least hopefully 10% down. I know first-time home buyers, you can qualify for less. I know oftentimes they say 20% is ideal. However, that's not always very easy for a first-time home buyer to do, especially when it's just myself. I'm not married yet. So my goal was about 10% down. So with that, I just kind of worked towards that number, knowing here's what my range, I guess you could say, would be of what I would want to spend on a home.
Sure.
And once I got there, was feeling a little bit more confident about actually, making some offers.
So when did that journey actually, not just the savings started roughly 3 years before, but I guess, how did you find used a real estate agent, correct?
I did, correct. And
okay, how did you find that real estate agent?
that was a referral from a family friend. So I
Sure.
had no idea where to begin to even start finding a real estate agent. So asked around and got the person's name that way.
Okay, and when was that roughly? Because you said you had identified in the spring and it wasn't going to be ready because it was kind of a new construction, which I think is really cool as well. But when did that engagement start?
Yeah,
roughly?
that was about a year prior to when I went under contract. So spring of 2020 is when I started that process.
So spring of 2020, right when COVID is in the middle of its storm. How many homes do you think you actually looked at or considered before writing this offer?
Probably I looked at, I would say 30 to 40 homes total. And I had 2 other offers that I had placed prior to this one, that I ended up not getting those homes.
Did you offer more than the asking price on this home?
I did. So this one, they had a set price. So I didn't on this one, but I did on the other 2. I went quite a bit over.
And still lost out?
And still lost out.
And I'm assuming you had been pre-qualified. So did you find your lender first or did you find your real estate agent first?
I found my real estate agent first, and then my real estate agent actually referred me to a mortgage broker who then had all of the connections elsewhere.
Sure. And then the title company, how did the title company come in? Was that a referral from the real estate agent?
That was a referral from the mortgage broker, I believe.
Okay. The
Yep.
reason why I'm saying this is because you're just that ideal profile of what we call the first-time home buyer. And I don't mean that this just is, right? You're renting, you have a great career, you want to start to plan for this journey of home ownership that all of us or most of us aspire to. And you surrounded yourself with the team, right, to identify, finance, and ultimately close the property. So you had the bases essentially covered well in advance of writing the contract on this. What was most stressful about the process? And then we'll pivot and get a little bit more into the weeds in the transaction. But what surprised you most as a first-time home buyer entering the market right during COVID? This is going to be a historical analysis of what happened in housing over the last 24 months. But just in your own words, what surprised you most?
You know, it's extremely overwhelming. I've heard multiple times through multiple people in my life that it's going to be one of the most overwhelming times of your life, and they were absolutely correct. Not really knowing how to navigate it too. I felt a little bit lost, especially given how the market is. Every time I would go to purchase a home, or to look at a home, even if I decided I liked it, I had to make a decision within, a couple of hours. I'm more of the type of person who likes to think through things a little bit more. So that was really a challenge for me to have to look at something, or even like the possibility of not looking at something and just looking at pictures. And then if you're out of town, doing a virtual showing, whatever it might be, it was just so crazy that it heightened the pressure of everything. So it was a lot more stressful than I ever anticipated it to be.
No, appreciate your candor there. And we're hearing that nationwide as well. So let's talk about the setup of the transaction. So it goes under contract. You mentioned like spring of last year, and with a move-in date somewhere like August, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And as part of the purchase agreement, you were putting roughly just over $20,000 down, right? It's like 2,801, I think was the exact number.
That's correct. Yep.
And that was your final cash to close obligation that you needed to meet, and the rest was being financed.
Absolutely. Yep.
So going through that, as we've gotten to know each other, and we'll get to that intersecting point that took place, almost 5 months ago now, is you never intended. So when you were requested to say, hey, Krista, you've got to bring roughly $20,000 to the table, the intention was not to send that via wire transfer. You had kind of set up an understanding with the title company and the parties that you were going to get a certified check.
That's correct. Yes. The week prior to my scheduled close date, I had received an email from the title company with just the appointment time and the address. They had mentioned that I could either bring a certified check or could wire the funds. I responded saying, thanks for the information. Sounds great. I'll plan on bringing a certified check.
So let's put a pin in that a second. How many days before closing were you having that communication roughly?
That was roughly 7 or 8 days, probably before, about a week prior.
Sure. And then how many weeks were you in the transaction? Was that, setting it up to close? Was that week?
Oh yeah,
2 or
that was a couple of weeks in. There had been a lot more communication prior to that, just of getting all of the ducks in a row to be able to get to that point.
And I'll circle back on why that's an important question as to when did the closing part of it? I know you had it under contract for a while, but that was because the developer hadn't finished it yet, right? It was essentially a new build, but things had heated up about 3 weeks before, and then you get this message around, hey, we have final numbers, this is your obligation.
Right.
What did you know either at the beginning or up until this point when you're asked to bring in funds about the risk of wire fraud, and from whom that was representing you?
I wish I could say I knew something from anyone, but unfortunately, I had never had anything communicated to me, at least in a direct communication about wire fraud. I had never received any verbal conversations about the risks of this, never had any sort of disclaimers or disclosures that I had to review or sign. There was nothing communicated to me prior to this point.
So when this incident happened, and I'll paraphrase roughly 50 buyers, a little more than that, that we helped last year recover funds. A lot of times when they land and they're asking for assistance to recover funds, I get a statement like, I just didn't even know this was a thing. I was completely unaware that this was a risk. Is that a fair summary of how you felt about this as well?
Very fair. That's exactly how I felt.
Was there ever a conversation, you were told what to bring in? Was there ever a conversation earlier than that of just how the funding process works from a buyer or the lender, like how money actually gets in for closing? Was there, if it wasn't wire fraud, was there any education around just the cadence of funding?
Unfortunately not. There was really not much explanation about the process at all. I'm not sure if that, can be attributed to the fact that I worked through a mortgage broker. So they were the ones that were securing a lot of those details for me, and that just wasn't communicated back. But I was completely blind to what the process even consisted of, and especially it being my first time,
Sure.
really had no idea what to expect or what the norm is.
So let's just take your real estate agent and your mortgage lender, and I don't know who they are, and I haven't asked, and it doesn't matter to me, other than the fact that I'm curious, was there ever like a roadmap or a transactional like flow that you were presented with as a summary, or is it just like, hey, buy the glass, we need to do this, then we got to do this, and then we got to do this, and okay, we're ready for money, and then be here at such and such date and time at this address?
Yeah, I would say it was definitely the latter of the two scenarios you just described. I wish that there was a little bit more of like a specific plan or a checklist almost that I was presented with of like, here's what you can expect at this time.
Sure.
So unfortunately, there was just really not much communication from either party. My real estate agent had indicated to me that all of the financing and the money stuff is done by another person, so they would be handling that. She didn't have anything to do with that aspect of it. So really, I had no idea what to even expect.
Sure. No, and I'm going to circle, I'll tie all this in our lessons learned, but that's why this
Yeah.
is very fascinating. All communications between, you were doing a lot mobily, right? I mean, like everybody does. So what percent of emails during this process do you think that you were reading and responding on your mobile device versus your desktop that you may be on right now?
Yeah, I would say probably 75% on my mobile device versus the 25% on my desktop computer. If there was ever any attachments I had to send to whoever it was, I would do that via my computer. But the rest of them, just as everyone does, you look at your phone. And I was communicating that way via the mobile app for my email.
Sure. All right, let's dive into it. Let's pull the curtain and let's walk through together. We're setting up, the table looks like this at this point. You've got all the requirements you need from the lender, right? You've signed off that, hey, they completed the house. They must have got a C of O occupancy certificate. So they gave you a closing date and a move-in date. And now there's this communication going back and forth that ultimately leads up to the requirement that you send in $20,000 or so. So we masked some of this for privacy, but one of the things I'm going to focus on is just how, I would say soft, but relational the communication is from the fraudster. So here's what we know about these emails. These emails are generated almost exclusively from an overseas party. So while the money might land in a domestic account under the control of a money mule that may know what they're doing, a romance scam victim, I mean, this is a complex area of just the money laundering aspect. We do know that this phase, this is coming from overseas, and they're either typing in their language and it's being transcribed into English, or they're dictating it. And I want to look in this. So congratulations on your upcoming closing. Your closing disclosure has been finalized and we're clear to close. You need to have the cash to close wired to the trust account today to avoid delay. Let me know if you can take care of this so I can forward you our wiring instructions. So you received this email on Monday and the closing was scheduled for, remind me when the closing was scheduled.
It was scheduled for Wednesday in the afternoon.
So 2 days before, they're saying, hey, let's get the money moving so we can have a good closing on Wednesday. And this came in mid-morning your time on Monday. So I want to decompress this or unpack this a little bit. It was mid-morning her time on Monday. It wasn't the middle of the night, which it might be for this person or people. There's no word kindly in here. They didn't go ahead and attach the wiring instructions. It looked like it was coming from the escrow officer because that's what the name read that's blocked out on the top. But looking at that mobilely, you wouldn't have seen that. When we decompressed it, we found it was coming through a spoofed Gmail account registered under the closing agent 350 at Gmail. So when you got this message, just curious what might have triggered off in your mind. What were you thinking when this came in?
Yeah. So when this came in, I was at work, a normal Monday, saw the notification. I have an Apple Watch, so I get notifications when I get an email. Opened up my phone, and as you had mentioned on the mobile app, I just saw the name of the escrow officer that I was scheduled to have my closing with. It had, the title company's signature line, everything looked, they do a good job. They know what they're doing. So it looked pretty legit. So at this point, I'm like, oh, shoot. Okay. Something must have changed. They told me last week that, I can either bring a check or I can wire the funds. Now they're telling me I need to wire the funds. So my thought is, okay, I've got so much going on. I've already had to provide so much stuff. Here's just one more thing to add to the list. So I want to get this taken care of.
And that's the mindset. And I'm glad you said that because it's just one more thing. And that's not wrong. It's just the reality that you're in right now. You've saved for 3 years. You had this deal on hold for 6 months while they finish it. You finally secure something after looking at 30 and offering on 2. And you're like, look, fine, I'll send you the money, whatever it happens to be. But again, you're disarmed in a way that you've been in a rhythm that says, request comes in, clear the request. Everything from due diligence to inspections to lender to whatever. So, and then I think you respond next saying, hey, interesting email, but I was told I could bring in a cashier's check. Is that no longer an option? Is wiring the only option? So you responded a couple minutes later saying, look, at least I was told previously that a certified check was an option. So it did trigger something in your mind.
It did. I'm like, last week, you guys, and it was, the same title company. So I'm like, you guys just told me last week I could bring a check. Like, why did that change now?
Sure. So, and then the fraudster comes back and says, okay, we don't accept cashier's checks or personal checks at the closing table now because the banks are placing a hold on these funds. So they create this excuse as to why the certified check won't work. All funds must be in the form of wire deposit to be credited before the day of closings. No exceptions. I think that is really interesting that they would use that phrase, meaning, look, there's no margin here where I can give. Please reply and confirm receipt so I can provide you with the wiring. So the fraudster still hasn't sent the wiring instructions. They're just convincing, they're having this conversation with you as to what changed.
Mm-hmm.
But you being you said, hey, this still doesn't seem right. That's what I love about this second one. Please send the instructions. I prefer to do it on my lunch hour. Also, I have the attached email. So you kind of push it back on them and you're calling BS a little bit saying, we just had this conversation, help me out here again, because I want you to know that this conversation took place.
Right. It's funny. I look back and I can actually laugh at this now, but I was frustrated. I'm like, why would you tell me that I could bring a check if now you're telling me I have to wire it? I wanted to be prepared to do this. So I wanted to show them, hey, your staff member told me this last week. So you should really clarify your internal process.
I love it. You jabbed him back a little bit. I think it's great. I'm not laughing about your incident.
No, yeah.
This was a bit of color that was bright in the conversational string.
Right.
And they respond by saying, okay, wiring instructions will be forwarded. Again, you're looking at it on your Apple Watch or your mobile device, and it looks like it's coming from the title company. And then they send it through what is essentially a spoofed secure email.
Yeah.
We haven't seen this before. And this is what I wanted to make sure the audience keys in on, is the idea that they're leveling up guys in the eyes of the consumers, the buyers or sellers, by making this seem like it's absolutely legitimate. Sending it through what looks like a secure portal. It wasn't a secure portal. You didn't have to log into anything, correct? You just
No.
clicked on it and it went right to the instructions. So it wasn't secure at all in the sense of we send secure, we got to create this login and password. So they send it secure, and then 10 minutes later, please confirm receipt. Also, when will the funds be wired so we can look for it? So taking a step back, in all the either attempts or actual events that we've seen where money was either solicited or transferred, there are common denominators of what the construct of these emails look like. One, new or changed wiring instructions. Second, you need to send the money today or soon. If you don't, then there's going to be some negative impact or ramification, and a request that you notify this party when the money actually is initiated. And the reason for that is because then on the back end, when the money hits the destination account, that fraudulent account, they can move it into crypto or cashier's checks, and we'll get into that whole thing. So here was the setup, and then the wiring instructions. So these wiring instructions were headed to BOA. That is the Bank of America ABA number under a John Hurley Trust Financial Officer account number. Were you ever told, I mean, had you ever wired money before, Krista, in your life?
Never wired money in my life. No.
What's the closest thing, like Venmo or
Venmo.
Apple Pay?
Yeah, Venmo. Mhm.
Venmo. And Venmo, you can look up my mobile number or give me your handle or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So let's think about this for everyone in the audience. So here's young professional renting 3 years, saving money, great job, finally goes through this process, has this back and forth, her gut's firing off, but again, it's just one more thing, right? So she receives these instructions, and there was never a thought to say, hey, and even if you get instructions, make sure it's going to us. Like, who's John Hurley and what account number is that? And I'm not pointing this towards you, Chris. I'm just saying to the audience, like, there are so many lessons learned on this journey that you had. And oh, by the way, she never intended to wire, because had you intended to wire, knowing you like I do now, you would have had a whole dialogue around, tell me about that process and what does that look like and how do I know? And right, you would have read into that much further. So this is the email. Hey, I just left my bank. It's been initiated. They said it should arrive sometime this afternoon. So you are responding back to them. This is still Monday. I mean, we're not even past lunch yet. So all this took place within like an hour or an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please email me when you've received it so I know everything's complete? Let me know. Fraudster, again, really casual, great email here. Okay, we'll watch for it. Like that would draw no red flag. Can you confirm you received the transfer? So this is Tuesday morning. You hadn't heard anything about the afternoon. So let's just go back a second. You send at 12:25 after the transfer on Monday. 12:35, they say, hey, we'll be on the lookout. They don't respond. You ping them back at about 11 the next day, and they say funds received immediately thereafter. Like they are monitoring this email that's coming in and out from you.
Mm-hmm.
So bring us, and I don't mean to rip off a Band-Aid here, but walk us through what happened next.
Sure. So as you can see on that Tuesday morning, I made sure that they had received the funds and they confirmed receipt. My closing was scheduled for the following day, Wednesday at 2:00 in the afternoon. The Tuesday afternoon goes by. I get a text message around 5:15 or so that evening from my mortgage broker contact saying, hey, Krista, we just received the final closing number for tomorrow. It is, 21,000 something. If you want to get your cashier's check in the morning and bring that with you to close, that'd be great. And I said, I wired those funds yesterday. I think there's that. And that was when I knew my gut was telling me, oh crap, I just got scammed. I, immediately went back to those emails. and opened them up on my computer that time and tried to call the number that was in the signature line of the person. Couldn't get through to anybody. And at that point is when I realized what had happened. And immediate panic set in because my close date is scheduled for, essentially less than 24 hours away. And I knew that I had just sent my entire cash to close amount to a fraudulent account at that time.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this was essentially your life savings, right? I mean, this is what you're preparing for.
Correct. Yeah, I had left myself money, to be able to go on after I purchased the home. But yeah, I mean, I had saved up for this for the past few years, so this was big for me. I had been working towards it, so losing all of that within a matter of hours was just devastating.
You mentioned the word panic, but if you don't mind, open up a little bit. Like, what did it feel like? And I'll share what it felt like when I learned of ours several years ago. But that is for me, it was a very, very visceral, extreme reaction.
Yeah, I had a very extreme reaction too. I think there was an overwhelming amount of emotions. My first one was embarrassment. How could I have fallen for something like this? I take cybersecurity courses, training at work all of the time. How did I fall for this in my personal life? Then I was just mad. Then I was just extremely worried that I wasn't going to be able to close on my home the very next day. Because I wouldn't be able to have those funds within that amount of time. So there was just so many emotions. I almost had like a breakdown. I've never really had anything like that happen to me in my life. I'm very fortunate to say that, but truly it was just absolutely devastating.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I mean, when we learned of Homebuyer fraud in the title company before Certified was even created, it was so impactful that we had lost 180,000, and time stopped. I was receiving information, and it was like framing itself, and I'll never forget it. But I can see where it moves from embarrassment, because I had approved the wire that ultimately went to a New York bank account to a cyber fraudster, and then how could this happen? And then you quickly move to like anger and concern, and you just feel violated. Like, it was just a sense of like, I know it's like money and it's a number in an account, but it's just like a real violation at the end of the day.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's talk about the impact. You talk about what it felt like, but what ultimately happened? You closed on that. So let's play it out two different ways. Tell us how it played out, and then how it could have played out, if you don't mind. I think that'd be effective. So what happened? Who did you contact after? So you're going through this emotions, you gather yourself, probably after just a few minutes, and then you dig in and you get to work, which I applaud.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what did that look like?
Yeah, my first call was, of course, to my parents to tell them, what had happened. I'm freaking out at this point. I immediately contact my bank as well to make sure that I'm contacting them as soon as possible. Of course, it was, almost 6 o'clock at that point, and, banks were closing, and I had to wait on hold for, all of that process. But, at that point, I think my first thought was, okay, what can I do to still be able to close tomorrow? I'm extremely fortunate to have, family members. My parents were in a situation that they were able to cover those funds for me, so I could close on my home the next day. So, our first plan was to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to be able to get this all set up to be able to still close tomorrow?
Did they bring in rolls of pennies? Like, what did they bring in?
Yeah, so my parents, so it's funny, they live about 5 hours away, and they went to their bank the very next morning when it opened, had to get a cashier's check, and then my mom drove down here to meet me. She met me at the title company office to be able to still close on time and everything. So I'm so very thankful for that I know not everyone is in that situation. And so if that hadn't happened, if I didn't have the family support, I wouldn't have been able to close, and I would have been out that money and had to go back to renting and start the savings process all over.
Yeah, and then from there, what would have costed, what's the cost of that same property 3 years from now in the market that we're in? That's the other thing that we lose sight of, is the fact that at double-digit appreciation in an average purchase price. I didn't look into yours, but an average purchase price out in the country is like 320 grand. This is adult money that we're talking about, even though we've worked on, and I'm transparent with you, our average recovery for our recovery services team hovers just under 400,000. Some of the impact on 20,000 or 15,000 or like sub 50,000 is, it might as well have been $1 million. Like, it was everything, right?
Absolutely.
So if you hadn't, if the parents wouldn't have stepped in, you would have lost out. We would have been back to kind of square one. How early, like let's do a post game a second, just for the benefit of how we as an industry can start to think about coming alongside buyers, especially first time home buyers. But I wouldn't even have that caveat. I'm like, nobody's in real estate enough to have muscle memory to understand what it looks like in 2022 mid-cycle in COVID of safely sending money for closing. We just don't have that point of reference. When do you think you should have, or when do you think, and I want to be a little hard on you here, when would you have been receptive to receiving information about the issue of wire fraud or transfers where you think you really would have paid attention?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know everyone's wired differently when it comes to how they soak in communication and information. I think myself, if I would have been told early in the process, especially if I would have had a very direct verbal conversation with either my real estate agent or mortgage broker, whoever it would be, if we talked about it, I would retain that. Also, even if I have to sign forms, if there's something that is extremely direct, and this is a big issue that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and you could be impacted, I would have soaked that in. So I would say, when I even went under contract in February of last year, if that was communicated to me then, I would have retained it. But absolutely, when I started the process of, providing all of the documentation needed to, secure my funding, everything like that, if there's the earlier the better, and the more times the better. I truly don't think this could be over communicated enough, and especially from multiple different people. There were a lot of misses that makes this the perfect storm. Even when I went to my bank to wire the funds, if that banker would have told me, did you call and verify that this is the right account? I would have had a little bit more of a red flag there too. So I think there's multiple touch points from people that deal with this on a day-to-day basis that the earlier the better, in my opinion.
No, I appreciate that candor, and even early. So let's just talk early stages. You're looking at houses, you get one under contract, you have due diligence, you got mortgage steps, you're finding, papers going back to whatever, high school, to satisfy the mortgage lender. You still feel that early in the process, something would have started a trigger, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Especially for a topic like this, I really do, because this is something that could impact someone so negatively that I truly think people will pay attention, at least if they have it in their ear early on.
So in a sentence or two, what would the advice or what would the message be to us? And us is the real estate community as far as agency, lending, and settlement, so that this doesn't happen to a buyer going forward. What would that message be to us?
Yeah, I would say treat every client like a first-time home buyer, and the more communication, the better. I really don't think that this message is advertised enough in general. I have really wanted to try and get the word out since it happened to me, but any real estate professional or title company employee, anybody who deals with this on a day-to-day basis, since it is such a growing problem, communicate that out and early and often. The more we can make people aware of this, the better, because I had nothing communicated to me throughout the entire process. And I can very confidently say, if I had known a little bit more, that this wouldn't have happened. And I have no doubt there are more people that are exactly like me who don't really know much about it. So they rely on the professionals to communicate this information. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
No, I couldn't say it better myself. So I want to do some takeaways, and everyone, if you have questions, please spin them up, and we can field them either to me or directly to Krista. Let's look at just a preview, and then I want to dive into some things that you mentioned earlier to put a finer point on them. It is very stressful to buy a house right now. We just did an analysis. I mean, most markets are less than 1 month of inventory across the board. So Krista's journey started, right in the middle of COVID, 30 homes viewed, 2 offers, 1 accepted, not even ideal state, because that was probably accepted because you're essentially buying something that was just framed and hadn't even been finished, right? So that might not have been the most ideal. You rely so heavily on your advisors. And I see that as an opportunity. I see that as to say, hey, are we self-aware of our role in this ecosystem of buying and selling properties? And if we are, there's opportunities to level up and distinguish those that are taking these steps versus those that don't think this is their problem. I don't touch money, therefore wire fraud is not a concern. Well, it's everybody's concern, right? Education awareness, you talked about that early and often. And I only challenged you early in the process because a lot of times agents say, well, don't send that notice. That's the last thing they're thinking about right now is wire fraud. They need to get through their inspections and their well and septic, and they got stips from the lenders, and they got all this stuff, right? Wait till the 2nd or 3rd week. And why I asked you about that timeline is that while the property was under contract for 6 months, things heated up when you knew that certificate of occupancy and your lender was ready to go. You had 2 weeks of back and forth. The 3rd week you were solicited with wiring instructions. What if we back that timeline up? And even if you just started then, you could have been approached that 1st week or that 2nd week, right? We don't know. And there's nothing that can prevent a title company or a closing company from being spoofed and solicited for a transfer of funds. I would agree with this, that I think you went through a life event. And let's talk about, because we failed to do this. You landed on our doorstep because the title company had escalated to a very senior person, and my cell phone rang. And I remember I was at our lake house, and I remember taking the call, and I'm listening to the details on first time home buyer and 20-some thousand. And so we end up engaging our recovery services team in sequence. Thankfully, we were able to identify and actually use a federal seizure power that we've only used, or we haven't used it. Federal law enforcement working with us has only used about 3 times last year. And they actually seized an account and then was able to generate a check out of that account to the US Treasury because they seized the funds. Then it had to go through this notice period. And just before the new year, I think I called you or emailed saying, hey, they're sending you a notice for you to submit the details and impact statement, basically claiming those funds. But it's been 147 days and you still don't have any of your funds back, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so of all the cases we worked, Krista and one was a total loss. And this person, very similar situation. It was a veterinarian clinic or veterinarian technician out of Florida. Her dream was quashed because home prices accelerated so fast that she's back renting. And that was the other scenario that I wanted to bubble out is how could this have played? But this is a long journey, guys. I mean, she'll likely be 6 months from incident to the time that, what are we expecting to get back? It was 20 was lost. Is it roughly 12 or 13, somewhere in that range, right?
Yep, about 13 is what we're expecting.
So 7 walked quickly, I believe, to a crypto wallet or cash. These guys do whatever it was. I think that was the money mule payment. But 1, Krista will not be made whole. And even though, call it 2/3 will be coming back to her, it has taken an exhaustive amount of effort on our part, or title company's part, and federal law enforcement to work through this process. And I would say, without question, the size of the loss has no indication of the impact on the individual that it's facing. In fact, a lot of times there's an inverted relationship that the smaller amount can have the more impact on people just like yourself, Krista. And what's interesting also is that just because you weren't planning on sending a wire doesn't mean that you shouldn't be educated or maybe even have received the proper wiring instructions should you have changed your mind after, or should you have been solicited and then you have say, well, I already received those instructions. I was told never to trust anything else. Now I'm getting new instructions.
Yeah, I
Or
think that's a great call out, Tom. If I would have received the secure instructions from my title company, I would have absolutely compared those. So that's a great point.
yeah, because that's what we're saying. Because a lot of title companies, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus on the call, but we hear it all the time. Well, we just stopped receiving wires from buyers. Well, that's great until the buyer gets solicited, and the first time the issue of a wire transfer comes up is the fraudster impersonating you. So how engaged or how prepared are the Kristas of the world to go through this sequence on their own? Your gut fired off twice. But the thing I want to mention and why I was asking those questions is your gut was firing within a vacuum. And the vacuum was you didn't have the pre-existing knowledge to know that this was shady. Like this was suspect. This is exactly, they told me what to watch out for. It just didn't feel right because of what you had remembered in communications past. The second was what I call a who's on first. That's why I asked, did the lender, did the real estate agent, did the title company, like if it's everyone's problem, then it's no one's problem. And I think as an industry, that's where we can step in to say, I don't care what the real estate agent does. I don't care what the mortgage lender does. I've got a buyer. The buyer is my customer. Yes, they were referred to me from somewhere else, but I'm issuing the policy for their benefit. I'm collecting a closing fee from them and I'm going to protect them. I'm going to own this category because had you been read in, Krista, from the title company or any of them, even just one of them, it would have benefited everyone. Title company has you engaged, that protects the real estate agent and the lender, not just from a monetary perspective, but from a liability perspective, right? From a reputation perspective. Yeah. And I feel strongly that all of these cases provide opportunities. And thankfully, I mean, I told you I can't give you the details I gave you, but it took a lot to get that information and finally get that check in motion for federal law enforcement because they're just simply inundated right now with this type of, issue. So, Krista, awesome story. We're going to share this in Washington to get more awareness from our friends there and lawmakers. But there's any parting thoughts or things you'd like to add to the group?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and share my story. I really think having been impacted by this, the more communication and awareness we can bring to this topic, the better. And I really appreciate your efforts, Tom, and the certified team to help me get these funds back. I can truly say without the certified effort, I would still be in the dark. There's not much communication that goes on aside for, like with banks and whatnot. So what you guys are doing is great for the industry. So appreciate the time and thanks so much.
No, appreciate that. One question, because I told I would answer questions. So sure. At what point do you think the fraudster learned about her transaction? What emails triggered them to start communicating? So we talked about this a little bit. The title company was not compromised. I can say that definitively, just based on the relationship that I know there and how deep we had to get into the weeds on this recovery. And to the second question, I'll talk about the recovery process a little more in a minute. But my suspicion is that the real estate agent who worked for a local agency, right? It wasn't a big brand, and used a Gmail or some open account, correct? The real estate agent?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what her account was, but it was a local, smaller account.
And so was the mortgage broker. So the risk profile, unfortunately, does go up when you're dealing with an agent that is not using a secure email system and a mortgage broker that's not tied to like an institution where they're in a mortgage lending department, like BOA's, mortgage lending department or whatever. So my strong suspicion is one of those were compromised. The emails essentially were analyzed. And then right at the right moment, again, the Monday before the Wednesday closing, they pop up, they've got all the information and the numbers jive and Krista goes down this path. The recovery process is simply, we have developed recovery services. This is not because certified was not used in this transaction. This was not a failure in our part at all. This is simply because of the instances, like say, we've got a half a dozen just in the last 24 hours. People find us and they know that we have deep ties into federal law enforcement, and we are very agile in collecting information relative to money that has moved to fraudulent accounts, identifying the banks, notifying those banks, and ultimately working back to see if funds are available, seizing those accounts, and then ultimately getting that back. So of the 20,000, there's going to be right around 13 that will be coming back. The other 7 left quickly. So did Bank of America not know the account number belonged to a fraudster? They don't know, and it might not have been a fraudster. So this is what we're seeing last year in particular: romance scams, work from home scams. These people think that they're just helping someone. They think they're in a legitimate job. They're opening these accounts, and what they don't know is the inflow and the outflow is supporting international money laundering. It's a whole nother course that we could do, or session we could do on money laundering. But that's the challenge with these, is the know your customer, and the regulations from an account opening standpoint are not flagging people that are law-abiding citizens that are being tricked themselves into opening accounts for nefarious reasons, thinking they're helping, like you say, a boyfriend or somebody on, a girlfriend online, a charity. I mean, I could talk for an hour on just the horrible social engineering and trickery they use for people to get them to move money in and out of their accounts. So, Krista, awesome job. I cannot thank you enough. Thanks for having the courage to share your story. It's a very powerful one. And I'll be keeping track until you get that money in hand and Uncle Sam's check cashes.
Well, thank you. I know I've probably been one of the most annoying people to follow up, but I appreciate the efforts, and thanks everyone for this.
Intriguing, not annoying. This one was intriguing. We worked this one hard, but anyway, good to get to know you and have an awesome day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
See ya.